I'm excited, and I hope over the next 20 minutes or so that there's an element of my capacity to inform and educate and enlighten. I'm a storyteller. My company, Dots and Bridges, connecting dots, building bridges, it's innate in all of us. And I would hope that today, some of the light bulbs that will hopefully go off will allow you to tap into some of that as well, because we all need to, in this day and age, understand again how technology is not only a part of our life, but it nourishes our life, much like food, not to parallel, but to understand the impact of the consumerization of technology and what we can use it for both now and in the future. So thank you again. I'm fired up again to be here. Eagle Dream, awesome platform. I love reaching out to communities beyond where I spent 25 years of my life. I was the Chief Technology Officer, not only at the Department of Energy, but also at the Department of Education. And I started off right out of Villanova back in the day. I'm 53 with 4 kids, and I'm aging myself, and one of them is 7. So I've had a pretty cool and blessed life. I started out in the Department of Defense in '91 and was very fortunate to be in the Pentagon of all places at such a young age, and understanding the role that the military, but also the Defense Department plays in protecting our borders and our country and collaborating with other nation states, etc. So the government's in my DNA. I've been out for 5 years. I hung a shingle, and I hope today that our journey over the next, say, 17 minutes or so will, if nothing else, help you understand that journey and what I experienced going through life, and the role that government and industry and academia play in the innovation ecosystem in our country. So we do have a poll. There are some questions. They're kind of more just to kind of get a sense of what you may know, what you don't know, and hopefully what will enlighten you to know. And I think we have them popped up there. So answer them, and then we will, I will look at some of those as I build them into our discussion. Today, it's going to be about storytelling. Today, it's going to be about sharing how smart cities, technology, and the sectors that support and power those cities, and how technology, humanity, and culture intersect. Let's not make any more out of it than it needs to be stated, but we depend on technology today. Our sectors that are transportation and energy and food and agriculture, think about what you use every day and just recognize that technology is underpinning those sectors. So there'll be a little bit of eye charts, but they're meant for you for later, and they're sourced from publicly available information. And while Keisha, who's awesome, had some pretty snazzy graphics, I hope I do right by at least maybe not being at her level, but enough for you to folks to say, hey, the guy's not too bad at PowerPoint. So there are the poll questions, and we're going to kick it in right now. I'm going to share my screen. And what we're going to do first is this slide. This is a slide that I like, hopefully those of you watching or watching at a later time understand. To me, I always think of things in threes, but the symbiotic relationship that public and private sector, and I don't just mean federal government, but federal, state, local, municipality, where you live, your zip code, government and industry and academia, and us, we as citizens, remember, we all have that personal life, and we all also have that professional life, but we depend on a lot of these businesses. Again, spent 25 years in the government. I know its role. I live inside the Beltway. I understand the impact it can have outside of the Beltway, but I also know that the external components and folks who don't live in DC per se understand really all that goes on in this place that is not just about politics, but it is really a nexus of opportunity and innovation. So I believe that whoever is in the White House, operationally, our country focuses on its workforce, on modernization, et cetera. And those are things that resonate across the board when it comes to the role of government. The role of government isn't just to put out laws and mandates. It's really to serve our country and our citizens' residents. But unfortunately, sometimes that opportunity to collaborate, and I think Keisha touched on this, it's not about the buy-sell paradigm. It's not about a transaction. It's really about how do you seek, how do you solve, how do you bring together, how do you connect the dots between an investor, an academic, a scientist, a business owner, an entrepreneur, but not just for making money, but for actually trying to solve a problem. And I think that, again, will be something that when you think about a smart city, you think about what goes into that city, and not just the vehicles and buildings and the technology and the people, but everybody has a role and a purpose. And each of you, if you do anything, is learn and understand that impact. Can't have a smart city unless you understand the technology that enables that city to be smart. And by smart, I mean, yes, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, the industrial Internet of Things, and we'll get into some of that. Lastly, you'll hear this a bit. It's sort of a thing that I just feel like makes sense to us as human beings. Technology, humanity, and culture. Culture in your family, in your life, in your business, in your city. Every city's different. Every human being's different. Technology is not the problem. Its impact on humanity can be traced back for years. We can get into that with some of the discussion on our national laboratory ecosystem. But you know, you triangulate and triage a bit of that. It has to be somewhat, mostly, or as often as it can be, in balance, or else it's not. And that's where we have problems. And we say, oh, it's the technology. Oh, it's the people in the political office in my town, or maybe it's you. And some of it is on you today and going forward to understand those impacts. So storytelling and translation is another phrase I love. You know, facts tell, stories sell. Keisha hit on that. It's not about the selling. It's about, does the mission that needs my technology matter? Do I even understand how to convey that information? And that requires translation. All right, moving on. The next slide, which, as you could tell, I'm trying to get going here. Here we go.
Pete, would you like me to share the results?
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry. Go for it, Corey.
No worries. Okay, here we go.
Wow, okay. So how many critical infrastructure sectors does our country recognize? Well, the winning answer is 16. And not a bad guess, but for those of you, we'll see a graphic soon, not too bad. Kind of like how I broke that up, but there was a lot of solid answers there. The fiscal year budget, it is pretty amazing, isn't it, to see that those are some pretty large numbers. Well, the answer is 142.2 billion for fiscal year 21. That's a B after it. And I like that a lot of folks went for half that. But wow, that actually helps me, and hopefully helps you understand how much money is being invested, your tax dollars at work that come into the government and go back out to industry to solve a lot of those challenges in our country. So very enlightening for me there. How many national laboratories comprise the United States innovation ecosystem? I'm not glad people got them wrong, but I'm kind of glad that my questions caused folks to ponder. The answer is 17. They've been around for 75 years. They're incredible institutions. I encourage you to Google or Bing or do whatever you do to search on the internet the history of these national scientific multidisciplinary institutions. So they're amazing, and they're worth your time reading about the discovery that's happened dating back to World War II. So the term national laboratory is now in your vernacular, and I appreciate you sharing those results. So moving on, this is a facts tell, stories sell, pictures worth 1,000 words. This in front of you is a chart that really struck me. It strikes me because of, again, its facts. Billion-dollar events that affected the United States for the last 40 years, okay? Deaths per year, deaths. These are the things that impact us. Why do you acts? Acts of God, horrible instances. And these are this is the critical infrastructure that when you hear those two words, I want you to start thinking about. Planes, trains, automobiles, dams. Look what happened recently in Midland, Michigan. Bad stuff happens and has happened over the past years. I have some notes here that I talked about, or I at least found when I was doing some research. The top 10 most unforgettable storms just in the 2010s. Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico, California firestorms recently, Hurricane Harvey, Superstorm Sandy, the tornadic spring of 2011, Hurricane Michael, endless floods in 2019 in Missouri, Oklahoma City, and the metro tornadoes, Carolina flood trifecta, the snowpocalypse of 2014. As a technologist who worked in several agencies where, whether it's with working in collaboration with FEMA, the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, I want you all to think about critical infrastructure as something we rely on. You flip a switch in your house, you get in your car, You buy food at the grocery store, you take a trip on an airplane or a train, you expect it to work and be safe. This message says that even with the best planning, and we can always do better, but the opportunity to leverage technology to create situations where mitigating risk to those critical infrastructure sectors that have been around for years. Our power grid alone is over 100 years old. You hear power grid, you hear, you know, the network that allows us to generate, transmit, and distribute energy to your home. It's not like it was updated yesterday. It's in a constant state of evolution. We need to care about and we need to invest in knowledge, people, and yes, money, so that these bad things don't happen as often. And just look at the costs associated with that. And I want to challenge everybody to say, you know, we all go around in our lives, we're busy, we're dealing with this crisis right now, the pandemic, but we know that what touches our heart, when somebody might in your family or community is suffering from this disease, man, I'm glad to know that there are people trying to solve that every day and leveraging technology to get rid of this virus and come up with a vaccine. But think of Katrina, think of Superstorm Sandy, think of Fukushima. Don't just think in the United States. Technology is not the problem. It's the foundation. It's how we integrate this into our lives. Going on to my next slide. These are just some facts. I won't go through each one of them, but as we think about the cities and the people process technology is something that we hear and says, yeah, it makes sense, but the onus is again on us as individuals to understand the technology we use, the processes, whether it's how you do your groceries, what you're doing at work for CRM, to Keisha's point, or just thinking and rethinking your business. But you also have to understand that in that culture, there is a workforce that has to deal with. And, you know, Mom, I love you if you're watching it, but to get her to understand her iPhone, it's not as simple as somebody else who maybe just wants to learn it, but we're going to keep trying. But that onus on the individual is important. But 1.3 million people are moving to cities each year. 65% of the world's population will live in the cities that are powered by technology today and looking to improve efficiencies in those cities. Economic growth, projections of investment in smart cities. I mean, if you're selling or you're buying, 2.57 trillion is a figure by 2025, and that number is just growing. So when you hear the Internet of Things, you're also needing to think about who's making those products, who's delivering those products, who's serving those products. 21 megacities is a term that I didn't even know existed until a few years ago, but there are lots of them now. There are those with greater than 10 million people living in them worldwide. I happen to chair the Smart and Connected Cities efforts in the federal government through the Department of Commerce, and I have a platform too with my colleague Ian Magazine and others, share what's happening internationally. And I offer that up because I've learned a lot about where there's innovation happening outside of the United States, how technology is being implemented. And smart cities and communities is something that I think should and could relate to you. It's not just a cool term, but incorporates a lot of smart people, a lot of regular people, if you will, part of the problem, and that public-private partnerships happening in cities around the world. But 34 billion annually, and cities running on information. I don't think I have to sell this audience on the power of data, the power of information, which is data with meaning, and then how we depend on that human-machine interface, whether you leverage the cloud or you're doing cyber-physical systems or you're, you know, mobile commute and opportunities because of things that happen for us to become much more informed about the power of technologies and, most importantly, improve that energy efficiency. The answer to that question these are the sectors. Again, I won't go through each one, but again, the good folks at the Department of Homeland Security, our country relies on these sectors. DHS, for those of you who know that acronym, I like to think of as the governing body, but every federal government agency, and there are many, okay, don't let anybody tell you there's 10, 20, or 30. For the record, Federal Register likes to think of it in terms of there's about 448, 450, depending upon the day. But these sectors are owned and operated generally by private industry. Okay, these are sectors. The federal government has a number of agencies that align to these sectors. And the key word on this slide is the workers, especially today, our healthcare workers, the people that are putting themselves in harm's way to keep our food safe, our energy up and running, the dams protected, and we have room for improvement. It's easy to say, why weren't they keeping things updated. Well, that's what we're trying to get to with IoT, Internet of Things, industrial Internet of Things, the sensors we want to put on, the drones we want to leverage. There's a power there that we need to respect when it comes to folks who work in this space. This is absolutely an eye chart, but it's kind of cool, and it's one that I love. Why? Because it shows you that smart city technologies for humanity and the standards that are being developed with those people, that whether I have plenty of friends that I mean this out of love, propeller heads, geeks, folks that go to work every day because they care about inventing and developing and innovating. Not how much money they're going to make, but working on things like standards for smart grid, for learning technologies, for the smart home, for electronic health, energy efficiency. Okay, this is the mission of government. Mission matters. And if you sell to the government that spends $90 billion thereabouts every year, not the $142 billion, separate coffer, $90 billion on IT support and services, you have an opportunity to help solve a lot of these problems, create smart cities for the future, and educate in the process. We all are homeowners in some way, shape, or form, but smart everything tends to be in our homes, from panels to cameras to locks to thermostats. Well, the conveniences of having a lot of this requires knowledge, requires being informed, and requires practicing with it, right? We depend on it, but it's easy to throw stones again if the technology doesn't work. There's a reason terms and conditions require you to read them at least, and I'm guilty of not always reading them when I download an app. But you're connecting yourself to the world through an IP address. For those of you who know what that means or don't, just know there's always a back door that could be there if you're not at least informed on, by downloading something or clicking on something, you could be creating a risk. So, you know, this is, to me, the humanity side of, we go home and technology surrounds us. We rely on it. We need it. We love it. I use one for my restful sleep and that sort of thing. And I kind of think it's pretty cool. This is a downloadable, put it on your wall, air pollution control, rooftops, the cities we live in. Okay, this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. This is the future. And what we know today is going to be nothing like it is 10 years from now. But the smart city, the smart, secure, connected city and community, the buildings we work in, the utilities we depend on, the transportation that we leverage, the infrastructure, those 16 sectors, the ping, the power, the pipe, the stuff you don't see, the spectrum in the air, it needs to be constantly in a state of improvement. And that's what we want. We want resilience in our country. We want a reliable network. We want to have security. But it doesn't take buying something off the shelf, plugging in, and hoping it works. As we get close to the end here, I just want to share a few referenceable slides, and whether, you know, this is a sampling to you folks. There is a lot happening in this space around smart cities and smart communities and so forth. I think it's oh, excuse me there. Let me go back one slide. I jumped to my final, but hey, there are frameworks, there are communities of interest, there's money going out. What an opportunity to be a part of the discussion. The government exists to help move that innovation pendulum forward. Again, this is a static slide of what there is to get involved in. You can reach out to me. There's the smart and connected cities and communities. There's the federal government with its communities of interest. There are nonprofits to get involved in. But I encourage you to read. Just read executive summaries. Don't worry about being a technologist. Keisha, we're all technologists. Just know the role that government, industry, and the individual, okay, needs to be in balance to move the innovation pendulum forward. And yes, I did a prequel to the slide, but this is, at the end of the day, what I find to be what's important: conveying message through stories. Facts tell, stories sell. And I don't mean the transaction. They sell your ability to comprehend. Stories sell us to feel emotion. You can do that through video. You can do that through voice. But don't just rely on reading a white paper or report. You have to feel it to appreciate and understand it. So that's my slide deck and the end of my slideshow. I'm going to stop my screen from sharing, and happy to take some questions. And I hope that was helpful in terms of giving you something to go do with your time when it's, do I read a book, or do I watch TV, or do I read a little bit about smart cities?
Thank you so much, Pete. That was awesome.
Hey, no problem. I appreciated it.
I do have a couple questions for you, and then if anyone else has anything, feel free to drop them in the chat box, and I'll make sure to get to those too. But one question I had is around the pace of innovation for these smart cities, because I'm sure not everyone is at the same place. Is this something that they're innovating over years? I mean, how many years? Kind of what are you seeing in the industry of how fast or slowly these smart cities are kind of innovating and adapting to these technologies?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that requires understanding and accepting. There's no one state. You don't graduate to being this smart, that smart, and then smarter. There's the adoption of a lot of the technologies that you could deploy and integrate. And make no mistake, this is not, again, a buy a smart device, plug it in, and it works, and I'm good to go. It takes working with your city officials, with the original equipment manufacturers, with your integrators, to become smart, and that's why I say it's constantly evolving. There are some cities, Pittsburgh's a great city to go read about, that's doing some nice things in that western part of the state. Chattanooga, I'm not going to try to single out because I know there's a lot of cool stuff happening internationally. But again, it's not you get to becoming a smart city tomorrow. You work in enclaves, you do use cases, you deploy something on a few traffic lights in your city to see, does that improve our traffic system? Is our recycling being picked up a more efficient manner? And then trusting the process, trusting that it's not about taking jobs away. It's about implementing technology and artificial intelligence and machine learning and the like, so that we can make better decisions as humans and tap into that part of our brain that is more powerful than a supercomputer on Earth. We want to make decisions and use our instincts based on data that is running 24/7 versus having people manning that and being caffeinated so they don't fall asleep at the wheel.
Awesome. No, that's great. One question that came in from Becky. Hey, Becky, I see you. Has Pete had any interaction with Johnson Controls?
You know, not personally, but I know all about Johnson Controls and I like to call operators of a lot of this critical infrastructure. You know, when you're in government, for as long as I was, you have this ultimate nonprofit I work for kind of feel. And my job was to be a connective tissue officer, as I like to say. I was a CTO, but my job was to get up every day, go to work, be passionate, be fired up to go knock on some doors and bring together the communities, whether it was a Johnson Controls with an academic working on a solar array with a sensor device and who's making that product. And that requires a lot of passion, but it also requires a lot of energy, which I feel is kind of what I'm about. But man, does it take convening. And you know, A Tipping Point's a book I've connected with literally because it talks about making change happen through people, information, and persuasion. And everybody has that in them. I just tend to think I got a little bit of that in me, and I think that requires me to keep doing that today, but working with those sectors. I have, for example, is out at the National Institutes of Standard and Technology with the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. There's a great Securing the Industrial Internet of Things effort, and we're working with those types of companies to kind of leverage their intellect, but then turn that into something that matters to the person who's flipping through their channels, watching TV one night and saying, why do I care? And I say you should care, but it needs to be translated into a manner in which you say, oh my gosh, I need to know more about that because it's impacting my life.
Awesome. One last question I have for you, Pete, is how these cities are going to bridge the knowledge gap or empowering their communities to embrace these technologies. Have you heard anything and have any insight there?
Well, I do. Again, that's a great question. I was very fortunate last year, 2019, to go. It's down in New Orleans. I went down with Secretary Moniz, former Secretary of the Department of Energy, and my colleagues at Denton's law firm that are very active, involved with smart cities and in the energy sector. And we spoke to the city council about, you know, post-Katrina, as they're building their city back and using technology. And there's always that fear of tech and robots and things taking over. You know, they call this thing the valley of death for a reason when it comes to technology. Some stuff they say is supposed to go off to die because it wasn't ready for prime time or never would be. But bridging that valley, and it's a term you could Google, valley of death, you will see that that's really the bridge that connects the innovators, the solvers, with the seekers who are saying, you know, now that you've built it up to an intellectual property or a technology readiness level of X, we can take it and go commercialize it, get it in industry and start making our roads safer, our food safer, our air cleaner, water cleaner, et cetera. So bridging that gap or bridging the relationship, or that's what, again, connecting dots and building bridges, it takes the conversation, which I think is most important, so that people have the light bulb moment and say, I understand and I want to be a part of solving those problems. You do not have to have a degree. You don't have to have a PhD, but you need to know where those people are and bring to the table that perspective, because a lot of those folks are myopic in trying to solve a problem. But sometimes it's, is this the right problem we should be solving?
Awesome. Pete, thank you so much. It was so
You
great
bet.
having you.
Oh, thank you. This is great.